Chapter 1. Introduction. Why Seafaring Changed the World. The history of mankind is inconceivable without seafaring. Long before airplanes connected the continents or digital networks exchanged information in seconds, it was boats and ships that brought people, cultures, and goods together over long distances. Seafaring was one of the earliest great technical achievements, and it is still an engine of globalization today. The fascination of the sea. The sea was a place full of mysteries for early humans. It offered food, but also dangers. Those who went out risked their lives, but they could also reap rich rewards, new countries, new trading partners, new resources. The sea has always been both a border and a gateway to the world. It separated people, cultures, and continents. It connected them simultaneously through trade and travel. It was a constant challenge that required technique, courage, and organization. Early on, humans had to learn to interpret currents, wind directions, and constellations, skills that later led to highly developed navigation systems. Seafaring as the engine of civilization. Seafaring influenced the development of civilizations more than one might suspect at first glance. Trade. Salt, spices, metals, fabrics, all of this was transported by water. Entire cities and empires owed their wealth to maritime trade. War. Powers that controlled the sea had decisive advantages. Fleets could blockade cities or conquer entire coastal regions. Culture. Ideas, religions, and technologies spread faster by sea than by land. Migration. Without ships, the colonization of many islands and continents would have been impossible. So the sea was not just a transport surface, it was a catalyst for progress. First boats, the beginning of the journey. The history of seafaring begins with the simplest boats, rafts made of reeds or logs, dugouts that were hollowed out to make room for people and cargo. Archaeological finds show that people were already traveling by boat over 10,000 years ago. These early ships radically changed man's possibilities. Rivers became transport arteries. Coastlines could be explored and settled. The first trade networks were created. This marked the beginning of a development that led to the huge container ships and high-tech naval ships of today. Seafaring as a mirror of human history. Seafaring also tells the story of mankind in a special way. In ancient times, it was the Phoenicians, Greeks, and Romans who ruled the Mediterranean. In the Middle Ages, the Vikings built their fast longships which took them as far as North America. In the early modern period, Europeans discovered new continents with caravels and galleons and laid the foundation for colonialism. In modern times, steamships, submarines, and aircraft carriers became symbols of industry and power. Today, it is container ships and tankers that drive world trade, quieter but no less decisive. Every era has had its ships, its heroes, and its tragedies, from Odysseus's Odyssey to the sinking of the Titanic. Why the history of seafaring remains exciting. Seafaring is more than the history of technology. It is a story of people who asserted themselves against nature, sought new horizons, and often achieved the unimaginable. It is the story of explorers who risked their lives to reach unknown shores. It is the story of the merchants who facilitated prosperity and cultural exchange. It is the story of the warriors and pirates who made the sea the scene of conflict. And it is the story of the engineers who repeatedly developed ships that became faster, larger, and safer. A common thread. In this video, we embark on a journey through maritime history. We'll see how the first rafts and canoes laid the foundation stone, how advanced civilizations such as the Egyptians and Phoenicians used the sea, how the Vikings and Hanseatics shaped the north, how the Age of Discovery redrew the map of the world, how industrialization revolutionized shipping, how modern technology determines seafaring to this day, and finally, what future seafaring could have in the age of sustainability and globalization. Conclusion. Seafaring as an eternal companion. For thousands of years, seafaring has been a reflection of human creativity and curiosity. Without them, many chapters of our history would not have been written. It stands for adventure, for progress, but also for conflict and power. Seafaring is not just a chapter of the past, but an ongoing adventure, and it will continue to accompany us on the oceans of our Earth and perhaps one day in the sea of space. Chapter 2. The First Boats, from Dugout Canoes to Rafts. The history of seafaring does not begin with large sailing ships, but with simple constructions: rafts, reed boats, and dugout canoes. These early vehicles may seem primitive, but they were revolutionary. They allowed people to cross rivers, explore coastlines, and trade across waterways for the first time. Archaeological traces: the oldest boats in the world. The oldest references to watercraft date back to the Stone Age. Rock carvings in Norway and Scandinavia show boats over 8,000 years ago, which were probably made of logs. In the Netherlands, the famous Pesse dugout canoe, dated to around 8000 BC, was found, the oldest surviving boat in the world. In Africa and Asia, remains of simple rafts have been discovered, probably made of reeds or palm trunks. These finds show that people recognized the potential of using water as a transport route very early on. Dugout canoes, masterpieces of simplicity. A dugout canoe is created by hollowing out a tree trunk. Tools made of stone or fire were used to work the wood. Such boats were sturdy, easy to manufacture, and could carry several people. They are particularly suitable for rivers, lakes, and calm coastal waters. Dugout canoes were so practical that they were invented independently of each other in many cultures, from Europe to Africa to Oceania. Rafts, floating platforms. At the same time, people developed rafts. They consisted of tree trunks or bundles of reeds tied together. Rafts were stable, could carry heavy loads, but were difficult to steer. Especially in river regions such as the Amazon or on lakes, they served as a means of transport. A famous example in modern times is Thor Heyerdahl's expedition with the Kon-Tiki, 1947, during which he sailed from Peru to Polynesia on a raft made of balsa wood, proof that such boats could also master long ocean voyages. Reed boats, light and versatile. In regions without large forests, people built boats out of reeds. In Egypt, reed boats were already used on the Nile 5,000 years ago. The Uros Indians on Lake Titicaca in South America still make reed boats that look like small ships. Such boats were light, could be built quickly, and floated well, but had to be renewed regularly. First navigation. How did you orient yourself? The early seafarers did not yet have compasses or maps. Their navigation was based on observation and experience. Stars. Even Stone Age people used constellations to orient themselves on the water. Currents and waves. Especially in the Pacific, Polynesians learned to read the smallest changes in the water. Animals and birds. Migratory birds or schools of fish often indicate the proximity of land. These techniques were simple but effective, and they formed the basis for later navigation systems. The importance of the first boats. The development of the first boats had profound consequences for humanity. Trade. For the first time, people were able to transport larger loads and exchange them with groups further away. Migration. Islands and coasts could be settled, for example in the Mediterranean or the Pacific. War. Boats were used for raids and military conflicts early on. Culture. Waterways connected regions and accelerated the exchange of ideas. Seafaring began as a pragmatic solution and soon became the engine of cultural and economic development. From small boats to ocean-going vessels. While dugout canoes and rafts were ideal for inland waters, new types of ships were soon needed for the open sea. The first sails were introduced to use wind energy. Oars helped to steer boats better. Hull shapes have been further developed to be able to carry larger loads. This marked the beginning of the transformation from primitive boats to the first ocean-going ships, a development that opened up new horizons for advanced civilizations such as the Egyptians and Phoenicians. Conclusion: small boats, big impact. The first boats were technically simple, but of immense importance. They enabled people to cross borders, trade, and open up new living spaces. Without these beginnings, the later maritime expansion would have been impossible. Seafaring began with bundles of reeds, tree trunks, and rafts, but it led to caravels, steamships, and giant containers. Every step in technology tied in with these first attempts. Chapter 3. Seafaring in the Early Advanced Civilizations. With the transition from hunter-gatherer societies to agriculture and sedentary life, the first advanced civilizations emerged, and with them, seafaring also developed decisively. Now it was no longer just a matter of crossing rivers or exploring coasts. Boats became instruments for trade, power projection, and cultural exchange. Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Indus culture in particular used water systematically to expand their empires. Egypt, masters of the Nile and pioneers of sailing. Hardly any other civilization was as strongly influenced by water as ancient Egypt. The Nile was a lifeline, transport route, and cultural center. As early as 3000 BC, the Egyptians used reed and wooden barges to transport people, stones, and food. Murals and reliefs depict boats with sails, an indication that the Egyptians were among the first to use wind power for locomotion. For the construction of the pyramids, ships transported stones weighing tons on the Nile. Particularly impressive were the seagoing ships of the pharaohs, which also sailed the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. Expeditions such as the one to Punt, probably in present-day Somalia, prove that the Egyptians traded over long distances, in gold, frankincense, and exotic animals. Mesopotamia, trade routes via the Euphrates, Tigris, and the Persian Gulf. The cultures of Sumer, Akkad, and Babylon also used boats and ships early on. Rivers such as the Euphrates and Tigris were the lifelines of the region. Archaeological finds show boats made of reeds that have been sealed with tar. As early as 2000 BC, there were merchant ships that sailed as far as the Persian Gulf. Metals, precious stones, and agricultural products were traded from Mesopotamia. Seafaring made the region a center for cultural exchange between India, Arabia, and the Mediterranean. Indus culture, early maritime trading power. The Indus civilization, ca. 2600 to 1900 BC, was also closely linked to seafaring. In ports such as Lothal, in present-day India, archaeologists found docks and warehouses, an indication of organized maritime trade. There was contact with Mesopotamia via the Indian Ocean. Trade goods such as cotton, pearls, and precious stones were exchanged. They probably used wooden sailing ships, which enabled coastal trade and deep-sea voyages. The Indus culture shows that the Indian Ocean connected an international trade network early on. Mediterranean and Levant, early maritime networks. Even before the Phoenicians rose to great maritime power, peoples in the Mediterranean used the sea. The Minoans on Crete, ca. 2000 to 1450 BC, traded intensively with Egypt and the Middle East. Their ships were equipped with sails and oars. The Mycenaeans in ancient Greece were also active at sea and led military campaigns across the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean was already a zone of intensive maritime networking in the Bronze Age. Technologies and innovations. The early advanced civilizations brought decisive innovations for seafaring. Sails used the wind and made ships less dependent on currents. Rudder systems improved the controls. Wooden ships allowed for larger and more robust constructions. Seaports, such as Lothal or Byblos, which organized trade. These innovations laid the foundation for complex fleets and long-range maritime trade. Seafaring as the basis of wealth and power. For the advanced civilizations, seafaring was more than just transport. Egypt used it to import riches from foreign countries. Mesopotamia connected its rivers with international trade routes by shipping. Indus engaged in active ocean trade, creating an early forerunner of global networks. Powers that controlled the water had a decisive advantage, a pattern that runs through the entire history of seafaring. Religious and cultural dimension. Ships played a role not only economically. In Egypt, ships were symbols of the transition to the afterlife. Gods like Ra traveled across the sky in the sunship. In Mesopotamia, boats appear in myths, for example, in the flood story of the Epic of Gilgamesh. In India, too, there are indications of the ritual significance of rivers and ships. Seafaring was therefore not only technology, but also deeply rooted in mythology. Conclusion: the birth of maritime civilizations. With the early advanced civilizations, seafaring began to systematically connect civilizations. Egypt used the Nile and the sea for trade and expeditions. Mesopotamia connected rivers with the Gulf and international trade. The Indus culture was a maritime trading power in the Indian Ocean. The first super-regional networks were created in the Mediterranean. Seafaring became an instrument with which advanced civilizations expanded their power, spread their culture, and built up trading systems. Chapter 4: Phoenicians, Greeks, and Romans. With the early advanced civilizations, seafaring began to become systematic. But it was above all the peoples of the Mediterranean, the Phoenicians, Greeks, and later the Romans, who made seafaring an instrument of global power. They developed complex types of ships, founded colonies, mastered sea routes, and made the Mediterranean one of the most important trade and war zones of antiquity. The Phoenicians, the first great seafarers. The Phoenicians, ca. 1200 to 500 BC, who lived on the Levant coast, today Lebanon, Syria, and Israel, are considered the first true masters of deep-sea navigation. Their cities of Byblos, Tyre, and Sidon were trading centers. They built fast, seaworthy ships with sails and oars. They used their seafaring for trade, colonies, and cultural connections. Trading networks. The Phoenicians connected the entire Mediterranean region. They exported purple dye, glass, and wood. They imported metals, grain, and luxury goods. Their most important colony was Carthage, in today's Tunisia, which later became a great power in its own right. Navigation. The Phoenicians were probably the first to consistently use the stars for navigation, especially the North Star. This allowed them to sail in the open sea. The Greeks, seafaring as a cultural power. The Greeks took over a lot of knowledge from the Phoenicians, but continued to develop seafaring. Trade and colonies. Between the 8th and 6th centuries BC, the Greeks founded numerous colonies around the Mediterranean. In southern Italy and Sicily, Magna Graecia, on the Black Sea, to the Iberian Peninsula. Ships were the link. They transported olive oil, wine, ceramics, and ideas. Warships, the trireme. The most famous Greek ship design was the trireme, a fast-rowing warship with 3 rows of oars on top of each other. With a bronze spur on its bow, it could ram and destroy enemy ships. In the naval battle of Salamis, 480 BC, the triremes played a decisive role when the Greeks defeated the Persians. Mythology in seafaring. Seafaring was also deeply rooted in Greek culture. Stories such as the Odyssey or the Argonaut saga show the importance of the sea. Gods like Poseidon were feared as lords of the seas. The Romans, rulers of Mare Nostrum. The Romans were not initially a seafaring nation, but they soon recognized the strategic importance of the sea, from the coast to sea supremacy. At first, other powers such as the Etruscans and Carthaginians dominated the Mediterranean. In the First Punic War, 264 to 241 BC, the Romans built a large fleet in a very short time and defeated the naval power of Carthage. After that, they gradually conquered the entire Mediterranean region. Mare Nostrum. The Romans called the Mediterranean Mare Nostrum, our sea. It became the central trade and supply route of the empire. Grain from Egypt, wine from Gaul, olive oil from Spain. Everything reached Rome by sea.
The Pax Roma made Mediterranean trade safe for centuries. Ships of the Romans. The Romans used different types of ships. Merchant ships, naves honoraria, for bulk goods. Warships, e.g. quinqueremen, with several rows of rudders. They perfected the use of naval bases and naval ports. Technology and innovation. The Phoenicians, Greeks, and Romans developed and disseminated important innovations. Sailing techniques, combination of square sails and oars allowed flexible maneuvers. Rowing organization, several rows of rowers enabled high speed. Shipbuilding, transition from reed and timber joints to stable plank hulls. Navigation, stars, coastlines, later also primitive maps. These developments made the Mediterranean the cradle of maritime civilization. Significance for business and culture. Seafaring was not only a military but also an economic and cultural force. It enabled colonization and cultural expansion. It created trade networks that spread wealth and luxury goods. It brought ideas, religions, and technologies from one end of the Mediterranean to the other end of the Mediterranean. In this way, the seafarers of the Mediterranean made a significant contribution to the networking of the ancient world. Conflicts and power struggles. Seafaring also meant rivalry. Greeks against Persians, Rome against Carthage, later Romans against pirates. The control of the sea routes has always been decisive for supremacy. Conclusion: the Mediterranean as an ancient center of seafaring. Phoenicians, Greeks, and Romans made the Mediterranean the heart of ancient seafaring. The Phoenicians connected the coasts as traders. The Greeks developed a naval power with triremes and colonies. The Romans transformed the Mediterranean Sea into a Roman inland sea. Their ships, ports, and networks shaped seafaring for centuries and laid the foundation for maritime expansion in later times.
Chapter 5. Seafaring in Asia, China, India, and the Indian Ocean. While the Phoenicians, Greeks, and Romans built up their shipping empires in the Mediterranean, an equally important maritime network developed in Asia. China, India, and the peoples of the Indian Ocean in particular shaped seafaring for thousands of years, often in the shadow of European historiography, but with just as great importance. Huge trade networks, technical innovations, and maritime cultures were created here, which paved the way for global exchange. India, the heart of the Indian Ocean. India has always been strategically located between East and West. As early as the Indus culture, circa 2600 to 1900 BC, there was maritime trade with Mesopotamia. Indian traders used the Indian Ocean to export spices, cotton, precious stones, and ivory. With the monsoon winds, they developed precise seafaring. In summer, the winds blew north, in winter, southwards, ideal conditions for seasonal trade. India was not only a supplier, but also a cultural exporter. Buddhism and Hinduism spread by sea to Southeast Asia. The Indian Ocean as a trading hub. The Indian Ocean was already a globalization era in ancient times. Arab seafarers connected the coasts from East Africa to Indonesia. They used the starry sky and knowledge of the winds for navigation. Ports such as Aden, Muscat, Calicut, and Malacca were hubs for international trade. Trade goods such as spices, silk, porcelain, gold, and slaves made the routes the most prosperous in the world. China, junks, and treasure fleets. China was one of the most innovative seafaring nations. Technical innovations. The Chinese invented the compass, 11th century, a revolution for navigation. They developed junks, large wooden ships with multi-story decks, bulkheads, and flexible sails. Their ships could transport hundreds of tons of cargo, far more than European ships of the same time. Zheng He and the treasure fleets. In the 15th century, the Ming dynasty under Admiral Zheng He, 1371 to 1343, sent out gigantic expeditions. Its fleet included up to 300 ships, including treasure ships of over 100 meters in length.
She traveled from China to India to East Africa. Zheng He brought gifts, traded, and demonstrated the power of the Chinese emperor. These fleets were the largest of their time and showed how far ahead of its era China was. Arab seafarers and Islamic expansion. After the 7th century, Arab seafarers shaped the Indian Ocean. They connected the Middle East with India, Southeast Asia, and East Africa. Arab traders founded coastal cities such as Zanzibar or Kilwa, which became trading centers. At the same time, they spread Islam as far as Indonesia and Malaysia. The Arab seafarers were also important mediators of knowledge. They later brought the knowledge of the compass and nautical charts to Europe. Southeast Asia, archipelagos and spice trade. The islands of Southeast Asia were a central hub. Empires such as Sri Vijaya, 7th through 13th centuries, and Majapahit, 13th through 16th centuries, controlled maritime trade. The region was the center of the spice trade, especially nutmeg, cloves, and pepper. Those who controlled these routes had access to riches that later lured European powers to Asia. East Africa, Swahili culture. At the other end of the Indian Ocean was the Swahili coast, Kenya, Tanzania, Mozambique. Cities such as Mombasa, Kilwa, and Sofala lived from maritime trade. They exported gold, ivory, and slaves, imported textiles, porcelain, and spices. Swahili culture was a melting pot of African, Arabic, Indian, and Persian influences. Navigation in the Indian Ocean. Shipping in the Indian Ocean was based on a combination of experience and innovation. Use of monsoon winds for seasonal routes. Orientation to stars and coastlines. From the 11th century onwards, the compass was used. In this way, the seafarers of Asia were long ahead of the Europeans. Significance for world history. Shipping in the Indian Ocean had immense effects. It connected 3 continents, Africa, Asia, and later Europe. It created early trade networks that anticipated globalization. It brought religions, Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, to new regions by sea. It made Asia the economic center of the world long before Europe rose to prominence. Conclusion: a maritime network before globalization. Asia has been a center of maritime innovation and networking for thousands of years. India as the heart of the Indian Ocean. China with its technological pioneering achievements and treasure fleets. Arab seafarers as mediators between cultures. Southeast Asia and East Africa as key regions in global trade. Even before the Europeans ushered in the Age of Discovery, a global trade and cultural network already existed here, supported by seafaring.
Chapter 6. The Vikings and Seafaring in the North. When you think of the great seafarers of history, names like Columbus or Vasco da Gama often come up. But centuries before them, the Vikings ventured far out into the stormy North Sea and the Atlantic. Between the 8th and 11th centuries, they made northern Europe unsafe as traders, explorers, and feared warriors. Their ships, the famous longships, were technical masterpieces and made voyages as far as North America possible. The Viking Age, an era of seafarers. The Vikings came from Scandinavia, today's Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. Their society was closely linked to the sea. Agriculture was limited because of the harsh climate. The sea offered food, transport routes, and opportunities. Coastlines, fjords, and islands made boats indispensable. The Vikings were farmers, craftsmen, traders, and warriors. Their ships allowed them to fill all these roles at the same time. The longships, the heart of Viking power. The nave was the symbol of the Vikings. Long, narrow, and flexibly built. With a flat keel, ideal for rivers and open seas. Equipped with sails and oars, which allowed for speed and maneuverability. Richly decorated, often with dragon heads on the bow. A longship could carry up to 100 men and was quick and easy to pull ashore. This allowed the Vikings to raid coastal towns and disappear again at lightning speed. Navigation of the Vikings. The Vikings were outstanding navigators, even without a compass.
They used the sun and the shadow stick to determine the direction. They probably also used so-called sunstones, crystals that make polarization of light visible to locate the sun when it is cloudy. They observed birds, currents, and waves to detect the proximity of land. These techniques allowed them to master long distances over the open sea. Trade and raids. The Vikings were not only robbers, but also traders. They traded in amber, furs, weapons, and slaves. They exchanged silver, fabrics, and luxury goods. Their trade routes reached as far as the Byzantine Empire and Baghdad. But they became notorious for their raids. From 793 AD, with the attack on the Lindisfarne monastery, the Viking Age began. They plundered monasteries and cities in England, Ireland, and France. Their speed made them feared. They were referred to as the scourge of the coasts. Expansion and settlements. The Vikings were not only warriors, but also colonists. They settled Iceland from 874 AD. From there, they reached Greenland around 985, Eric the Red. Around 1000 AD, Leif Erikson landed in Vinland, probably Newfoundland in Canada. This made the Vikings the first Europeans in the Americas, 500 years before Columbus. Their colonies were small, but they show the enormous range of their seafaring. Impact on Europe. The Vikings changed Europe profoundly. In England, they founded the Danelag, a zone under their control. In France, they received Normandy, land of the Norsemen, from which William the Conqueror later came. In Eastern Europe, Swedish Vikings, the so-called Varangians, sailed down rivers and founded trading cities such as Novgorod and Kiev. In doing so, they influenced the emergence of later empires in Europe. Mythology and seafaring. The sea also played a central role in Norse mythology. The god Njord ruled over wind and sea. The journeys of the Vikings were reflected in sagas and heroic songs. Ships also had significance in death. Important personalities were buried in ship graves. The combination of faith, culture, and seafaring shaped their identity. The end of the Viking Age. With the Christianization of Northern Europe and the strengthening of the kingdoms, the Viking Age ended in the 11th century. Coastal regions were better protected. New forms of trade made raids less attractive. Many Vikings were absorbed into European societies as Normans, traders, or mercenaries. But their legacy lived on in shipping, trade, and culture. Conclusion: Masters of the North. The Vikings were seafarers who shaped their time. Their longships were technical masterpieces. They combined trade, expansion, and war in a unique way. They reached America long before Columbus. Their influence shaped Europe from the Atlantic to Russia. The Vikings show that seafaring is not only about trade, but also about power, culture, and expansion.
Chapter 7. Medieval Seafaring in Europe. After the end of antiquity and the fall of the Western Roman Empire, a new phase of seafaring began in Europe. It was initially characterized by regional trade and local coastal shipping, but developed into one of the central engines of business and politics in the High and Late Middle Ages. The Hanseatic League, the maritime republics of the Mediterranean region, and the technical development of ships and navigation made the Middle Ages a bridge between antiquity and modern times. Early Middle Ages, regression and new beginning. In the early Middle Ages, ca. 500 to 1000 AD, seafaring in Western Europe was initially less pronounced than in antiquity. The collapse of Rome caused trade networks to disintegrate. Coastal shipping dominated. Smaller ships, simple sails, river traffic. Trade was local, but important goods such as salt, fish, and wine continued to be transported. During this time, it was the Vikings in the north and the Arab traders in the south who dominated maritime trade. The Hanseatic League, a maritime trade network. In the High Middle Ages, a unique maritime organization developed in Northern Europe, the Hanseatic League. Origin and significance. Founded in the 12th century, initially as an association of North German merchants. It grew into a powerful league of cities that controlled trade from London to Novgorod. Hamburg, Lübeck, and Bremen were central Hanseatic port cities. Ships of the Hanseatic League. The cog was typical. A robust merchant ship with a high board. A single large square sail. Loading volume up to 200 tons. The cog was safe and versatile, ideal for the North Sea and Baltic Sea. Commercial goods. The Hanseatic League transported salt from Lüneburg, herring from Scandinavia, furs and wax from Russia, grain from the Baltic states. The Hanseatic League became so powerful that it waged wars against Denmark and England at times. The Mediterranean, Venetians and Genoese. In southern Europe, the Mediterranean was the center of seafaring. Venice became a leading maritime power from the 9th century onwards, controlled trade between Europe and the Middle East. Their fleet consisted of galleys, long, slender ships powered by oars and sails. Venice was a hub for spices, silk, and luxury goods from Asia. Genoa, competitor of Venice, also a powerful commercial republic. Involved in trade with North Africa and Spain. Rivalry between Venice and Genoa led to centuries of naval wars. Crusades and trade. The Crusades, 11th to 13th centuries, made the Mediterranean ports even more important. Ships transported not only cruisers but also goods. The Italian city-states benefited enormously from this development. Technical developments in the Middle Ages. Shipping continued to develop decisively technically. Rudder. The side rudder has been replaced by the stern rudder, much more precise. Sails. Combination of square sail for tailwind and lateen sail for crosswind made ships more maneuverable. Compass. From the 12th century onwards, European sailors used the Chinese compass. Nautical charts. Precise coastal maps with marked ports and distances to facilitate navigation. These advances paved the way for the later Age of Discovery. Pirates and conflicts. In the Middle Ages, seafaring meant not only trade but also danger. Pirates attacked merchant ships. In the North Sea, the Hanseatic League fought against pirates like the Victual Brothers. In the Mediterranean, the Barbary pirates, who operated from North Africa, were feared. Many cities and states therefore invested heavily in fleets to protect their trade routes. The role of seafaring for the economy and society. The seafaring of the Middle Ages had a lasting impact on Europe. Economical, it connected northern and southern Europe in a dense trade network. Political, powers such as Venice, Genoa, and the Hanseatic League dominated through their fleets. Cultural, goods, ideas, and people moved faster by sea than by land. The growing importance of seafaring made Europe ready for the next big step, expansion across the world's oceans. Conclusion: Europe on the way to seafaring. Medieval seafaring was less spectacular than the voyages of the Vikings or later the explorers, but it was crucial. The Hanseatic League connected Northern Europe into a powerful trading network. Venice and Genoa made the Mediterranean the center of East-West trade. Technical advances such as compasses, stern rudders, and nautical charts paved the way for transoceanic voyages. In the late Middle Ages, Europe was well prepared for the Age of Discovery, which was to completely change the map of the world.
Chapter 8. Age of Discovery. The late Middle Ages had prepared Europe for a new epoch with trade, compasses, and improved ships, the Age of Discoveries, 15th to 17th centuries. During this time, European seafarers dared to take the leap beyond the known borders for the first time, across the Atlantic, around Africa, and as far as Asia. These voyages of discovery changed the map of the world and laid the foundation for colonial empires, global trade, and the beginning of modern globalization. The prerequisites for the discoveries. Several factors made the Age of Discovery possible. Technology. New types of ships such as the caravel, fast, agile, seaworthy. Improved navigation through compass, astrolabe, and portolan maps. Stern rudder and sail combinations made longer journeys possible. Economy. Europe was looking for new trade routes, especially for spices, pepper, cinnamon, nutmeg. The land route to Asia was blocked by the Ottoman Empire. Politics. Powers such as Portugal and Spain invested specifically in seafaring. Kings and princes sought wealth and prestige through discovery. Religion. Missionary work also played a role. The Portuguese, pioneers of the Atlantic. Portugal was a pioneer of maritime expansion. Under Henry the Navigator, 1394 to 1460, the systematic exploration of the African coast began. 1419, discovery of the Madeira Islands. 1430s, exploration of the Azores. 1488, Bartholomew Diaz sailed around the Cape of Good Hope. 1498, Vasco da Gama reached India and opened a direct maritime trade route to Asia. In doing so, Portugal laid the foundation for a trading empire in the Indian Ocean. Christopher Columbus, the discovery of America. Probably the most famous seafarer of the era was Christopher Columbus, 1451 to 1506. In 1492, he set out from Spain with 3 ships, Santa Maria, Pinta, Nina. His goal, to reach India via the west. Instead, he landed in the Bahamas and discovered the New World. Columbus didn't know he had landed on a new continent, but his journey opened the way for the European colonization of the Americas. Magellan, first circumnavigation of the world. Ferdinand Magellan, 1480 to 1521, started the first circumnavigation of the world in 1519 on behalf of Spain. Crossed the Atlantic and discovered the Strait of Magellan, named after him. Sailed across the Pacific, which he called it Peaceful Ocean. Magellan himself died in the Philippines, but in 1522, part of his fleet returned to Spain. This proved once and for all that the Earth is a sphere and that it can be circumnavigated by sea. Spain and Portugal, division of the world. The two maritime powers, Spain and Portugal, divided the world among themselves. 1494, Treaty of Tordesillas, a demarcation line across the Atlantic. Portugal was given the right to Africa, India, and Brazil. Spain on America, with the exception of Brazil. This agreement made them the dominant powers of the 16th century. The Netherlands and England, the rise of new maritime powers. In the 17th century, new powers appeared on the scene. Netherlands founded the Dutch East India Company, VOC, 1602. They dominated the spice trade and built a global trade network. England founded the British East India Company, 1600. In doing so, they laid the foundation for what would later become the British Empire. These nations increasingly displaced Spain and Portugal. Consequences of the Age of Discovery. The voyages of discovery had profound consequences. Globalization. Worldwide trade in spices, silver, gold, sugar, tobacco. Exchange of plants and animals, Columbian exchange. Colonialism. Conquest and exploitation of America, Asia, and Africa. Destruction of indigenous cultures. Science. New maps. Insights into geography and navigation. Beginning of the modern conception of the world. Society. The slave trade became a central part of the new trade networks. European powers became rich and built colonial empires. Technological masterpieces, caravels and galleons. The Age of Discovery was also the heyday of new types of ships. Caravel, small, maneuverable, ideal for voyages of discovery. Galleon, larger, heavily armed, ideal for trade and war. These ships were the basis for expansion. Conclusion, the beginning of global seafaring. The Age of Discovery was a turning point in human history. The Portuguese and Spaniards opened sea routes to India and America. Columbus and Magellan changed the view of the world. The Netherlands and England rose to become global maritime powers. It was the beginning of the era of global seafaring, which combined trade, culture, power, and conflict worldwide, and the effects of which we still feel today.
Chapter 9. Colonialism, Trade, and Maritime Powers. After the Age of Discoveries, a new phase of seafaring began in the 16th and 17th centuries, the time of colonialism and the maritime great powers. Europe conquered and dominated large parts of the world, and seafaring was the most important tool of this expansion. Trade, wealth, and political power depended on who controlled the sea routes. Spain and Portugal, the first colonial powers. Spain and Portugal were the pioneers who translated their discoveries into colonial empires. Spain, conquest of large parts of America, Aztec Empire in Mexico, Inca Empire in Peru. Silver mines of Potosi and Zacatecas made Spain immeasurably rich. The silver stream flowed across the Atlantic to Europe, and from there to Asia. Portugal, establishment of bases in Africa, India, Southeast Asia, and Brazil. Control of the spice trade through bases such as Goa, Malacca, and Macau. Portugal thus created a base empire that connected strategic ports. Both countries dominated seafaring in the 16th century, but their monopoly did not last long. Netherlands, the Golden Age. In the 17th century, the Netherlands rose to become the leading maritime power. 1602, founding of the Dutch East India Company, VOC, the first joint stock company in the world. VOC ships controlled the spice trade in Indonesia. Amsterdam became the center of world trade and finance. The Dutch were not only traders, but also skilled shipbuilders. Their Floyd ship was particularly efficient because it could transport large quantities with a small crew. The Dutch merchant fleet was at times the largest in the world. England, the rise of the empire. At the same time, England began to expand its maritime power. 1600, founding of the British East India Company, which soon became the most powerful trading company in the world. English pirates like Francis Drake plundered Spanish ships full of silver. The defeat of the Spanish Armada, 1588, against England marked the beginning of England's rise. In the 18th century, England increasingly controlled the sea routes, and thus laid the foundation for the British Empire. France, rivalry with England. France was also a maritime power, but it remained mostly in England's shadow. French fleets operated in the Atlantic, the Mediterranean, and the Caribbean. France founded colonies in Canada, the Caribbean, West Africa, and India. Especially in the 18th century, France and England were in almost permanent naval war, from the 7 Years' War to the Napoleonic Wars. Piracy and buccaneering. The period of colonialism was also the golden age of piracy. Pirates attacked merchant ships, especially in the Caribbean. Buccaneers acted on behalf of states. In principle, state-legitimized pirates. Well-known names such as Blackbeard or Henry Morgan became legends. Piracy was an expression of the constant competition between the colonial powers. Triangular trade and slave trade. The colonial era brought a new brutal economic system, the Atlantic Triangle trade. European ships transported goods, weapons, fabrics, alcohol to Africa. From there, slaves were deported to America. In America, the ships loaded sugar, tobacco, cotton, and rum for Europe. Millions of Africans have been enslaved, one of the darkest sides of maritime expansion. Naval supremacy and wars. Dominance on the seas decided wealth and power. Anglo-Dutch naval wars, 17th century. England and the Netherlands fought for trade supremacy. Franco-English rivalry, naval wars from the 17th to the 19th century. Spanish silver fleets, constant target of attacks. Naval policy became the central element of any great power. Technological development, from galleons to ships of the line. The colonial era also produced new types of ships. Galleon, armed sailing ship ideal for trade and war. Ship of the line, from the 17th century, powerful warship with several cannon decks. Tactics of the line, ships sailed side by side and fired at the enemy, the basis of modern naval battles. These ships were floating fortresses and symbols of state power. Colonialism and the world economy. Seafaring was the foundation of colonialism. Raw materials from America, Africa, and Asia flowed into Europe.
Europe exported goods and weapons. A world economy emerged that was heavily controlled by the maritime powers. The supremacy at sea decided who determined the rules of world trade. Conclusion: the sea as the key to world power. The colonial era was characterized by a clear logic. Whoever ruled the sea ruled the world. Spain and Portugal began to expand. The Netherlands, England, and France replaced them. Trade, piracy, and war determined the oceans. Seafaring connected the continents, but also exploitation and violence. This epoch laid the foundation for the age of industrialization and made seafaring a symbol of power, wealth, and global networking.
Chapter 10: The Industrial Revolution and the Transition to Steamships. The Industrial Revolution in the 18th and 19th centuries fundamentally changed not only factories, cities, and societies, but also seafaring. Sails that dominated the world's oceans for thousands of years gradually had to give way to steamships. This development revolutionized trade, warfare, and the way people traveled the world. From wind to steam, a revolution at sea. For thousands of years, ships were dependent on the wind. Industrialization brought a new source of energy, steam engines powered by coal. The first experiments with steam propulsion took place as early as the end of the 18th century. In 1807, Robert Fulton introduced the Clermont, a working steamship on the Hudson River in the United States. In Europe, steam technology became established from the 1820s onwards. Advantages of steamships: independence from the wind. They could also sail in calm or headwind. Predictability. Departure and arrival times could be better planned. More powerful engines allowed larger ships and more cargo. The first steamships. The early steamships often still had sails as additional security. But soon a completely new generation of ships developed. Paddle steamer, with large paddle wheels on the sides or stern. Screw steamers. From the 1830s onwards, the ship's propeller became established, more efficient and safer. The use of iron and later steel in shipbuilding made the ships even more stable and larger. Merchant shipping and globalization. Steamships accelerated global trade enormously. Goods could be transported faster and more reliably. Liner shipping companies, such as the Cunard Line or later the White Star Line, offered regular transatlantic connections. Europe, America, Africa, and Asia moved closer together. Steamship was a driving force behind the second wave of globalization in the 19th century. Passenger shipping, the era of ocean liners. Steam technology also marked the beginning of the age of large passenger ships. Millions of people emigrated from Europe to America in the 19th century, many on steamships. Ships like the SS Great Eastern, 1858, were technical marvels, over 200 meters long, weighing 32,000 tons. Later came the famous luxury liners, such as the Titanic or the Lusitania, which were not only a means of transport, but symbols of progress and prestige. The ocean liners made the world smaller and travel faster. They were the airplanes of their time. Suez and Panama Canal, new maritime abbreviations. Steamship shipping was also revolutionized by new waterways. Suez Canal, opened in 1869, connected the Mediterranean Sea and the Red Sea. The route to India became thousands of kilometers shorter. Panama Canal, opened in 1914, connected the Atlantic and Pacific, a breakthrough for world trade. These canals made shipping faster, safer, and more efficient. Steamships in war. The Kriegsmarine also changed dramatically. Sailing battles were replaced by steamships with iron hulls. The British HMS Warrior, 1860, was the first large iron warship, symbol of a new era. Armored cruisers and battleships dominated from the late 19th century onwards.
The Industrial Revolution led to the emergence of national fleets, which exacerbated rivalries between great powers, especially between England and Germany before World War I. Colonialism and steamships. The European colonial powers used steamships to control their empires more efficiently. Raw materials such as cotton, rubber, and coal were transported en masse. European armies and officials were able to travel quickly to distant colonies. Fleet bases and coal port networks secured global influence. Steamship was a tool of imperialism. Innovations in shipbuilding. The transition to steamships brought a number of technical innovations. Iron and steel ships, much more stable than wooden ships. Screw drive, more efficient than paddle wheels. Multiple expansion engines improved the efficiency of steam engines. Electricity. From the end of the 19th century, electrical systems found their way onto ships. These developments made ships bigger, faster, and safer. Societal impact. Steamship also shaped the lives of millions of people. Migration. Millions of Europeans emigrated to America. Tourism. The first cruises were created. Work. New professions emerged on ships and ports. The world moved closer together, both economically and culturally. Conclusion. A new era on the world's oceans. The Industrial Revolution fundamentally changed seafaring. The dependence on the wind was over. Steamships connected the continents faster and more reliably. Trade, migration, colonialism, and war took on a completely new dimension. Steamship shipping was the transition from traditional seafaring to a modern industrialized world, and it paved the way for the gigantic ships of the 20th century.
Chapter 11. War and Technology in the 20th Century. The 20th century was a time of profound changes on the world's oceans. New technologies, 2 world wars, and the Cold War made seafaring not only the backbone of world trade, but also one of the most important arenas of military conflicts. Warships, submarines, aircraft carriers, and amphibious landing operations determined the maritime history of this era. The role of seafaring in the First World War. The First World War, 1914 to 1918, brought seafaring into a global war network for the first time. The British Royal Navy blockaded Germany and cut it off from world trade. The German answer was U-boats. U-boats equals submarines, which sank merchant ships. Unrestricted submarine warfare led, among other things, to the sinking of the Lusitania, 1915, one reason why the USA entered the war. The First World War showed that control of the sea routes could make the difference between victory and defeat. Interwar period, rearmament and armament limitation. After 1918, the powers sought a balance. The Washington Naval Treaty, 1922, limited the number and size of battleships. Nevertheless, countries developed new types of ships, especially aircraft carriers. Japan, the USA, and Great Britain recognized that air power at sea was the future. The course for the next war has already been set. Seafaring in the Second World War. The Second World War, 1939 to 1945, turned the oceans into global battlefields. Battle of the Atlantic. Germany again relied heavily on submarines to interrupt British and American supply lines. The convoy became the answer. Merchant ships traveled protected by warships. The Battle of the Atlantic lasted the entire war and was decisive for the victory of the Allies. Pacific War. Japan relied heavily on its navy and, above all, on aircraft carriers. The Battle of Pearl Harbor, 1941, showed that airplanes had displaced battleships. Major naval battles such as Midway, 1942, were decided almost exclusively by aircraft. Landing operations. D-Day, 1944, the largest amphibious invasion in history, in which thousands of ships brought Allied troops to the coast of Normandy. The Second World War made it clear that the future of naval power lay in aircraft carriers, submarines, and modern technology. Cold War, nuclear fleets and nuclear deterrence. After 1945, the sea became a central theater of the Cold War. Nuclear submarines. From 1954 USS Nautilus, submarines could remain underwater for months. Missile submarines became the most important element of nuclear deterrence. U.S. aircraft carrier fleets ensured the global presence and projection of military power. The Soviet Union also relied on a large navy, especially submarines. Seafaring became the stage for an arms race between East and West. Technological developments in the 20th century. Shipping made enormous progress during this time. Steel construction, warships and merchant ships became larger and more stable. Diesel and gas turbine drives increasingly replaced steam boilers. Radar and sonar revolutionized navigation and warfare. Aircraft integration, aircraft carriers as floating bases. These innovations made shipping more efficient than ever before. Merchant shipping in the 20th century. In addition to warfare, civilian shipping also underwent major changes. Passenger ships. The ocean liners, example RMS Queen Mary, SS United States, dominated until the 1950s. With the advent of the aircraft, transatlantic passenger shipping lost importance. Container shipping, from 1956, revolutionized the transport of goods. Containers made loading faster and cheaper. This marked the beginning of a new era of modern globalization. Social significance. Seafaring in the 20th century was not only militarily but socially formative. Millions of migrants used ships until planes took over the crossings. War experiences such as submarine dangers or Atlantic convoys became part of collective memories. Merchant shipping became the basis of the modern world economy. Conclusion: the century of extremes. The 20th century was marked by extremes at sea. 2 world wars in which ships played a central role. The transition from battleships to aircraft carriers. The importance of submarines, especially in nuclear deterrence. The beginning of container shipping as the basis of modern globalization. Never before had seafaring decided so much about war and peace, hunger and prosperity.
Chapter 12. Modern Merchant Shipping and Globalization. Today, hardly any sailing ships sail the oceans, and the large passenger liners have also become the exception. But merchant shipping is more important than ever. It is the backbone of the modern global economy, without which our everyday lives would be inconceivable. Container ships, tankers, and cruise ships shape the oceans and make it clear that seafaring is not the past, but the present and the future. The container shipping revolution. The biggest change in modern shipping began in the mid-20th century with the introduction of the container. In 1956, the U.S. entrepreneur Malcolm McLean sent the first container ship on its journey. Standardized steel boxes made loading much faster and safer. Containers could be loaded directly from ships onto trains and trucks, intermodal transport. Today, around 90% of the world's trade volume is transported by ship, the majority in containers. Giants of the seas. Container ships have grown to gigantic dimensions in recent decades. The largest ships can transport over 20,000 containers, TEU. Length over 400 meters, width almost 60 meters, floating cities. Ports such as Singapore, Shanghai, or Rotterdam are hubs of these global networks. In addition to container ships, there are also other specialized types of ships. Tanker for oil and gas. Bulk carrier for coal, grain, and ore. Ro-ro ships for cars and machinery. Globalization and dependencies. The modern world economy would be impossible without merchant shipping. Smartphones, clothing, food, almost everything will be transported by ship at some point. Production chains are global. A car can contain parts from 5 continents. Disruptions in maritime traffic have immediate global consequences, e.g., blockade of the Suez Canal in 2021. Shipping is the invisible foundation of the global lifestyle. Cruises, tourism at sea. In addition to trade, the cruise industry is also booming. Modern cruise ships are floating hotels with thousands of passengers. Popular routes: Mediterranean, Caribbean, Baltic Sea. Cruises are a symbol of leisure and luxury, but also controversial because of their ecological footprint. Modern navigation and technology. Today's merchant shipping uses state-of-the-art technologies. Satellite navigation, GPS, for precise routes. Radar systems for safety in narrow waters. Autonomous systems to optimize fuel consumption. Today, ships are floating high-tech plants. International rules and security. Shipping is regulated by international organizations. IMO, International Maritime Organization, sets safety and environmental standards. Piracy remains a threat, especially off Somalia or in the South China Sea. Modern ships have emergency systems, safety zones, and escort protection. Challenges: environment and climate. Modern seafaring is facing major challenges. CO2 emissions. Merchant shipping is responsible for around 3% of global emissions. Sulfur emissions pollute the environment and health. Oil spills and plastic pollution harm the oceans. The industry is working on solutions. Liquefied natural gas, LNG, a cleaner fuel. Hybrid and electric drives in initial projects. Return to wind support through modern sails and rotors. Global competition for sea routes. Sea routes are geopolitically highly sensitive. The Suez Canal, Egypt, the Panama Canal, Central America, and the Strait of Hormuz are critical bottlenecks. The Arctic sea route is gaining in importance as the ice melts. Powers such as China, the USA, and Europe are investing in ports, fleets, and maritime security. Those who control the sea routes continue to dominate a large part of the global economy. Digitization and automation. The future of merchant shipping is increasingly automated. Autonomous ships are being tested, e.g., Yara Birkeland in Norway. Digital systems optimize routes to save fuel. Container ports are increasingly working with robots and AI. The maritime world is on the verge of a new technical revolution. Conclusion: seafaring as the invisible backbone of globalization. Modern seafaring is indispensable. It transports the majority of all goods. It connects continents, markets, and people. It is at the heart of globalization, but also of ecological and geopolitical challenges. Without shipping, there would be no globalized world as we know it.
Chapter 13. The Future of Seafaring, Sustainability and New Horizons. Seafaring has thousands of years of history, from dugout canoes and rafts to giant containers and nuclear-powered submarines. But the journey is far from over. Today, shipping is at a crossroads, between environmental challenges, new technologies, and the question of how it will survive in a changing world. Sustainability as the biggest challenge. The most important question for the future is, how can shipping become more environmentally friendly? Around 90% of global trade passes through ships, and they emit about 3% of global CO2 emissions. Heavy fuel oil, the usual fuel, is extremely harmful to the climate. International regulations, such as the IMO 2020 rules, already prescribe lower sulfur fuels. But that is not enough. The industry is looking for new solutions. LNG, liquefied natural gas, as a transitional solution. Methanol, ammonia, and hydrogen as possible fuels of the future. Wind power in a new form. High-tech sails, Flettner rotors, and kites that power freighters. Electric drives for short distances and ferries. Seafaring could thus become a laboratory for sustainable technologies. Autonomous ships, the digital future. Automation will radically change shipping. Initial projects such as the Yara Birkeland, Norway, show that freighters can drive fully autonomously. Autonomous ships could work safer, more efficiently, and more cost-effectively. Digital systems take over route planning, fuel optimization, and collision avoidance. The vision: fleets that cross the world's oceans like self-driving trucks, controlled by land centers with satellite connections. New routes due to climate change.
Climate change is also changing the geography of seafaring. The Arctic ice is melting and opening up new shipping routes. The Northeast Passage along Russia and the Northwest Passage through Canada could shorten the distance between Europe and Asia by thousands of kilometers. But this development is geopolitically explosive. New competition for resources and sea routes. The Arctic could become a center of global maritime trade in the future. Maritime geopolitics. Control over sea routes remains crucial in the 21st century. China is massively expanding ports and shipping lanes with its new Silk Road, Belt and Road Initiative. The U.S. continues to rely on its powerful fleet to secure trade routes. Piracy, e.g. in the Horn of Africa, remains a challenge. The sea remains a strategic space in which the question of power of the future will be decided. Ships as floating cities. Modern cruise ships and ocean liners show how gigantic ships can become. Future ships could be even larger, more efficient, and multifunctional. Megaships could become floating factories, floating power plants, or even floating cities. The boundary between ship and infrastructure is becoming blurred. Maritime and space travel, a new parallel. Interestingly, there are parallels between seafaring and space travel. Navigation in space is reminiscent of early navigation at sea. Spaceships are basically ships, only in a vacuum instead of in the ocean. Some experts are already talking about the cosmic seafaring of the future. So the history of seafaring could one day continue in space. Education and technology. The future of seafaring is also determined by new knowledge. Simulations and artificial intelligence optimize shipping traffic. Training for seafarers is becoming more digital and global. Research vessels investigate climate, oceans, and deep-sea resources. Seafaring thus also remains a field of scientific innovation. Conclusion: a new era on the oceans. The seafaring of the future is facing major changes. Sustainability will be the central topic. Autonomous ships could revolutionize transportation and security. New routes through the Arctic and geopolitical competition will rearrange the seas. Ships could become floating cities and laboratories. Just as the first dugout canoes changed the world thousands of years ago, the seafaring of the future will also shape our global society as an indispensable part of the economy, culture, and technology.